Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Ulf Andreasson here. I work as a senior systems engineer in EMEA for Sumo Logic, and I'm going to take you through a session here with regard to AWS Observability that we have in Sumo. So with that, I got a couple of slides here. I'm gonna start with to kind of set the scene, and then I'm gonna take you through demo. And we're gonna be looking at various different things that you can do specifically in AWS environment that hopefully you're gonna like. But just to begin, feel free to put any questions in the chat or in the Q&A. And also, we're gonna kind of kick it off and set the scene here. So you probably know that Sumo Logic is a continuous intelligence platform. And what we mean by that is effectively pulling sort of interesting data from your IT environment, regardless if it's a on-prem environment, regardless of if it's a on-prem environment or if it's a cloud sort of environment you're running it in. But we can effectively collect any of that sort of structured and unstructured data coming into Sumo. Normally what we collect is kind of metrics, logs, events, and traces, but that doesn't stop you. So effectively anything that's text-based and that could make sense for your kind of analytics and correlations could be ingested. So we get customers, for example, who are ingesting IoT data or weather data and many other data sources, in addition to what you would get from a data center or a cloud environment. The beauty with Sumo is that we would collect that, we'll make it available for you, effectively index it, store it, and sort of, if you want to have alerts against it or any kind of real-time views, we can give you that too. Now, that kind of takes away the whole burden of running the platform and managing all that data and all the pipelines and everything, right? So you and your colleagues, as in, the right-hand side here, developers, operations, security, anyone within your company can effectively access a Sumo sort of portal. You can access it using the portal and the user interface, but you also have APIs to it as well as, using Terraform providers and such. So there's a lot of things you can do. There's a lot of sort of capabilities in here, but the beauty is that, Sumo, being this kind of cloud native platform that really gives you that sort of capability, the scalability, flexibility, all those kind of abilities that you would want to have. Now, on top of that, you're of course also going to be able to get a lot of actionable insights, and we use machine learning and advanced analytics to kind of give you that. And the use cases that most of our customers are looking at is operational, security, and business-like. I say business-like because I don't want to kind of take you through the BI track, so to speak. This is more kind of, this is more looking at information you may have in log files and application-related information, not necessarily the kind of fully full sort of BI type analytics that you would do in data marts or data warehouses or those kind of things. But it still gives you a lot of context. And of course, having that business intelligence, being able to understand how the business is impacted by any kind of operational challenges, that's really what we want to give you, right? So with that in mind, we are also the most secure and certified continuous intelligence platform out there. So having all these certifications and attestations, also being a sort of moderate authorization for FedRAMP, really helps our customers, being sure that when you put any data into Sumo, you are going to be able to still sort of, be certified to ISO 2700 or SOC 2 or whichever certification is important for you. All this data with regards to the certifications, the pen testing, all this kind of thing is available through our self-service portal. So, just, yeah. The other simplistic thing as well, although equally important, is of course that any data that goes in or is stored in Sumo Logic is encrypted. The encryption is there and it's being rotated every 24 hours. So, Sumo really provides a very secure service for you. Now, the customers using Sumo Logic is, we get over 2,000 customers using it. Quite a few of them are running in AWS, but as you can see on this slide, there's a lot of sort of different. We have a lot of on-prem, we have a lot of Azure, GCP, sort of AWS, and also what we see now is that multi-cloud and sort of Kubernetes is increasing very quickly. And this is just one sort of the screens, but I want to take you through to this section of the website we have. We actually have something called the Continuous Intelligence Report. And this report is available here for you. And what this really is that what we do is we anonymize all the data of our customers, but then we can actually access that data and sort of look at it and see kind of trends coming. There's a lot of good information in here. Just quickly, here is the kind of effectively the view you saw. But we can also look more in details of the number of services that customers are using. The types of services in AWS, for example, that is heavily used. So EC2 always comes up as the top service, but also S3 and CloudTrail is kind of there too, right? IAM is, of course, there. But not only that, we can see, the number of accounts that customers are using, the number of regions that customers are using. And this is kind of the data that sort of draw the attention from us or to us, from or to, whichever. But this is kind of where we get notified around that customers really are starting to have quite a large number of sort of, the number of customers over 5 accounts. I've been working with some customers who have like 250 accounts throughout the world with multiple different regions for every account. So having that kind of complexity, that is kind of where we're trying to, what we're trying to help you with. So I just urge you to kind of take a look at this report. It actually gives you a lot of interesting data here. So things like, the kind of increasing deployments of Kubernetes, the kind of what we're seeing here in general, the type of databases, and a lot of good information in all in all. So with that in mind, AWS customers using a lot of different accounts, using a lot of different regions, and the complexity of the number of, components that you have in your modern applications. Modern applications today is typically microservices oriented. There's a lot of moving parts in there. There's a lot of network and communication between all these microservices. So that really kind of means that you need to really understand this better. This is why Sumo has come out with or has released the AWS Observability. We have AWS Observability, which will make it easier for you to understand, to not just understand, but also collect all the data and kind of make it available. But it also has something called the Root Cause Explorer, which we're going to look into as well. Really helping you to identify and visualize any kind of services, metrics, and the likes that you probably should take a look at. And all of this is out of the box. So effectively, you start to collect the data, you kind of click on that you want to use AWS Observability and wait sort of 10, 15 minutes and you're good to go. And yes, as I said, not only is it important to kind of be able to, observe and to see all this, but to collect the data. So first of all, we do that with using CloudFormation. We are actually very soon going to be able to kind of set things up using Terraform as well. But for now, we're kind of using AWS CloudFormation templates. So with that, we're collecting all the different sources here, and these are just a couple of examples. There are more sources that we collect from, but all of those sources are being enriched. So those are being enriched with the account, with the region, with the namespace and entities. So effectively, what database service or what sort of data service you're using, and what instance of that data service is that. So that's effectively what you get with the namespace and entity, right? But being able to kind of show you that in context so that you can focus on what services you're running, not the kind of infrastructure that you have supporting those services. And that's actually very important, because that's kind of going to drive how you can look at and how you can pivot within your environment. So with that, I want to take you through a demo. And effectively, as I said, I've got Sumo running here, so it has all the applications and all this, just to kind of cover that off as well. AWS is just part of what we do. And you have over 200 integrations, anything from AWS services to Azure to GCP. But also, if you want to look at it from a DevOps perspective, you're probably running Kubernetes, you're probably having a lot of CI/CD tools. There's a lot of things there. You may be open tickets in Jira and all those kind of things. So you want to have the integration both from being able to open a ticket, but you maybe also want to look at how many tickets have been opened this week or this month. Maybe using a lot of Lambda. So you want to see that too, right? And then, of course, we have the basics too. So, if you get a couple of web servers or databases, we cover those as well, right? So you would have the traditional sort of MySQLs and Oracles, but you probably also have a lot of different sort of cloud services or cloud database services. So, we have those covered there as well. And as you probably do as me, working from home. So, from a company perspective, maybe companies want to be able to see how many Slack channels do you have, which ones of those are private versus public, and how are people interacting there, or teams, or, all of those kind of things, which is good to have. So with that said, let's kind of go to the details of what we said that we were going to talk about. So AWS Observability, and this is effectively an environment that we have here. It's not completely true. There are actually some of these servers running, but there's also a lot of synthetic data here coming in. But the beauty with this is that I can now pivot. So I got this kind of hierarchy on the left-hand side, which basically shows me the different accounts. On the right-hand side, I get a dashboard that's suitable for that object that I'm looking at. So right now we're looking at the dev account, and I'm looking at an overview. Now, there are many different sort of dashboards that I could use. Some of these out of the box. This DevSecOps and the services detail here is actually something we put together. So you are kind of perfectly fine with creating your own dashboards and making those available for, depending on which kind of structure or which hierarchy you're looking at. Now, let's dig deeper into this, because when you click on any of these things, you see that my data sources here are changing to be specific to the prod environment. I can also go down to the region of this, and then you see that I'm looking at regional view of this. These looks pretty much the same because we haven't kind of changed them that much, but of course, you may be kind of focused on different things here, and you can change any of these dashboards. You can make it look like exactly that you want to have it. But the beauty here is that now I can see the different data services that I'm using within this kind of production US East 1 environment. So taking something simple, everyone's got a couple of EC2 systems somewhere. I can just kind of pivot into this, look at it. I can see the ones which are running hotter, from a memory or CPU perspective. There's a lot of metrics down here. So, not really that many logs in this case, but I have them accessible if I need to. So let's just take one of these. When I click on this, with the exception to the Spark line that give me some view, although it's very kind of small, I can now sort of pivot straight into logs or error logs. I can also be kind of going into different recommended dashboards. So maybe if I'm interested in this CPU and kind of maybe I'm looking at an API gateway because that EC2 instance is actually supporting the API gateway and so on. But I could also pivot into the kind of environment or the infrastructure. So I was looking at the region here, and I can go pivot straight into the instance ID. I do have, of course, the instance ID here, but when you get names like this, it's not really that easy to kind of really find the one. So it's, of course, much easier just clicking on this one, and it takes me straight into that sort of specific EC2 instance. Now, as I showed you before, I can look at this, see all the metrics here for this, but, we can easily go down to look at file system usage or memory usage or whatever. So all of these things is because we collect this information, even if it's a custom metric for AWS, but we can still collect that and we can still sort of make that available at no cost as well. So, you don't have to rely on just the kind of EC2 metrics or the CloudWatch metrics. So it just gives you a lot of flexibility. Now, EC2 instances isn't maybe the most interesting thing. So let's look at some Lambdas. So here I get a view of all my Lambdas, or as in functions that are running within this region and this kind of production instance. I get to see the call locations. So effectively, where are my, callers coming from? I can look at the top used sort of functions or Lambdas. So it gives me a lot of detail here. Oops, not sure what's happening here, but I should see the number of invocations today compared to yesterday. Not sure why, but as I said, it is a demo environment. But I should also see things like duration. So, duration, throttling, any kind of performance issues and stuff like that, right? So it sort of takes me through quite a lot of things. I can see by duration, I can see sort of memory used, and there's a lot of information here. Now, one thing that stands out a bit, or actually before we do that, I want to go into one of these kind of calls as well, or one of these Lambdas. So when I do that, I can then see specific information about a specific sort of Lambda. And of course, similar as you saw before, but now we're looking at a specific sort of function name. So that gives me more details with regards to that function. Now, there is, again, a lot of information here, but one thing I want to highlight, and that's the kind of threat intel feed we have. So when you use Sumo has a backend sort of connection to CrowdStrike that will give you access to CrowdStrike threat intel database. This means that when we have an invocation here, we get an IP address that's kind of calling this. We can actually identify if that IP address or host name or username of some kind, is that associated with any kind of bad actor or malicious kind of behavior? So just by being able to look at those sort of entities like IP addresses, users, and so on, we can actually identify if there's any known actors that's being associated with that. So if that is the case, maybe we should be kind of careful. Maybe we should start looking into this. So it just gives me a lot of information here that could be really, really useful. And of course, here I can now get a complete threat table. So I'm just able to dig deeper into this if I want to do that, right? So this is not just for Lambda. So threat intel from CrowdStrike, that is available for Sumo as a whole. So you can use that at pretty much any time you want. But let's go back to take a look at some of the issues I'm having here as well. Because when I look at all these Lambdas, one of the things that I'm interested in is the number of kind of failures I may have. And of course, when I look at this kind of view here, I see that, there's quite a few number of errors. And when I look at this table here, I see that just to kind of get billing info here, it's got 720 arrows itself. So, 7,000 for the last 24 hours is a lot, but 700, that is kind of very high compared to the other one, which is 140, 150. I can also see here on this view that basically, get billing info is constantly failing. So it doesn't even have any kind of successes like the other functions here do, right? So of course, this could be interesting to kind of take a look at. And what I can do is go from that straight into the kind of error logs and just look at the error messages that I'm seeing in here. Now, this is an aggregated view, so I'm just going to get a couple of numbers, but I can go in here and I can kind of see the type of error messages. So here I'm actually, passed out the fields here. And the error message here indicates that I have a lot of invalid credentials, so data authentication errors. Now, I can use this kind of field here, and I got this field browser, so I can very quickly look at it from there. And out of my 722 different results here, as in error messages, I can see that 720 of these basically has an authentication error. So that's kind of a bit alarming. And the question is, why is that happening? Now, let's go back and take a deeper look at this, because what I can do here is kind of get even deeper into it, right? So if I would just filter, and I can filter on any function that I have running, but in this case, I'm actually filtering on that sort of function name. So now I can go down here into most frequent function operations, because what I want to see is what kind of events have taken place with the get billing function. So as you can see, I get the same data. It's just now focused on the get billing. But the interesting one here is that I can open this in the search. And again, instead of looking at the aggregate, I'm actually going to be looking at the event name that has an update function configuration. This has happened 3 times here. So obviously someone has kind of went and changed things, and the question is, what have they changed? In this case, I don't have the underlying data, but what I do have is that we said it was 3 occasions of this, right? The results 3 here, not very high and not very big, but you can still see it there. Mark Smith seems to be the guy who's been doing all these 3 edits. And this is kind of within that time frame that we're looking at. The beauty with Sumo is that it always will keep the kind of time frame that you're looking at it, and effectively what the content of what you're looking at. So you can pivot around, you can look at different things, and most of the times, or as long as you kind of use time frames, it's going to keep you within that. So just to kind of make sure, what I probably need to do, because this was so constantly failing, quickest one is probably just to go to Mark and check with him to see, what did you do there before, or what did you kind of change there? Because obviously it hasn't really been going that well since you did do that, right? So that would be sort of something that I would effectively take a look at. So I'm hoping that UK, yep, I got a question here. Let me take that later on because that's kind of more a generic one. But yeah, so I'm hoping you kind of seeing some of the value and some of the simple things we can do here, right? One other thing I wanted to highlight is kind of some of the unique ways that Sumo can sort of analyze data, and that we can highlight sort of different things. So you remember I kind of showed you the production environment here. What I would want to do is just kind of quickly show you a DevSecOps kind of view, simplistic one. It's not brilliant, I know, but it just shows you the kind of builds you're doing, the CI/CDs, or actually not CI/CD, but some of the builds we're doing there and log levels that we're seeing. You have somewhat the web operations here, so VPCs and ELBs and stuff like that, right? Now, what I, looking at this application, I want to look more at the technical details of it. And I can see that suddenly I had a lot of bookings here, and this is actually a travel booking website. Not brilliant today, I know, but you know, we all kind of try to do as good as we can. But as you can see here, this is kind of suddenly starting to fail. And at the same time, I'm seeing that we sort of have a lot of CPU and error, CPU and sort of memory usage here. But at the same time, this error count is kind of increasing as well. I see that there's a couple of functions, and I can see that there's some fluctuations, and it looks like this because basically we're inducing a problem every kind of 15 minutes. But the point here I'm trying to give you is not necessarily how you can see the dashboards, but it's actually how you can interact with them. So what I want to do here is I want to drill in to kind of look at the increased error rate that you're seeing here. And I can do that by just kind of click into it, right? And the beauty with this is that when I go into it, and in this case, I'm actually going to look at all the different logs that I have in here. What I can do here is that I'm actually going to take the same sort of information, but in this case, because I want to get the raw sort of data, and I want to use something called log reduce. So you can see, you know, normally I have a button I can press as well, but because I had sort of a aggregated query here, it sort of took that away from me, but I can always use the operator like this. Now, what log reduce does, it takes all those log files, or sort of log lines, and it basically looks at them, and it organizes them or clusters them together to say, this log line looks very similar to this other one. It has a lot of, you know, variations in level name, or maybe some kind of function name or line number or whatever it may be. But these are pretty much the same. And I can see that, you know, this first one seems pretty okay. It's just informational line, and then you get a get call, not surprising. But then you can see that 31 log lines here is basically a handshake error with regards to your certificate. You know, so it kind of stands out here a bit that out of, we didn't have that many, but 175 different log lines, you get roughly 62 or 63, which are basically talking about sort of handshake problem and certificate problem. So again, I got customers who comes in every day in the morning. The first thing they do is just basically say like, okay, I want to look at, maybe I have a specific data set, or maybe I want to look at everything. And I just want to run log reduce based on all that data. You know, the beauty with Sumo is that you are getting charged for how much data you're sending into Sumo. But if you do a heavy operation like this, it's at no cost, so to speak. You know, you can look at this and you can go in there, you can sort of, you know, analyze data, you can do all sorts of things here. And that computational cost is actually not sort of taken up by you. It's just part of the package, so to speak. So I urge you, you know, when you get data into Sumo, make use of it, run the queries, use kind of log reduce and log compare and all the other technologies in there, right? It has a lot of value to you, and you can do a lot of smart things with it. You know, there's now this one, I'm not sure how much it's going to look at, but it's it shouldn't be too bad. I mean, it's just a couple of minutes. So yeah, but I mean, yes, we're up to 100,000 log lines here and still sort of going on, but it's not, I think it's getting closer to the end of it. But yeah, anyways, one last thing I want to touch on as well. Because coming back to this one, and yet again, quite a lot of you have sort of ELBs and ALBs and all those kind of things. And of course, we're all looking at how can we make customers kind of using or understanding the customer experience of your applications, as in how can you use Sumo to understand your customer experience, your customers' experience better. So with that is you probably want to have a look at like, okay, do I have any 500s and 400s? In this case, we get a bit of a spike here. So that's kind of a bit interesting. And what I want to do here is that I'm just looking at the last 24 hours. So this is not sort of complicated per se. I could sort of pivot in to look at this specifically as in this time frame, which is roughly about sort of 3 p.m. But what I can do here is I can pivot in something called events of interest. And this is going to take you into Root Cause Explorer. And if you remember from the slides, I did mention that Root Cause Explorer is effectively a way for us to visualize what you can see within your environment. Now, this one is only looking at the last 60 minutes. So let me open up this to look at the last 24 hours instead. Now I can see that I got one issue here, but what's happening here as well is that I can filter the data. So in this case, I've filtered to look at the ELB apps, but I'm actually going to clear that out. And you can see here as well, right? If I get a Kubernetes environment or application services, as in tracing environment, I can look at that too. I get a couple of different things that I can really use here. So if I get seasonality in my data, and we look for seasonality, but I may have, I still may want to be able to kind of change this to some extent, then I can do that. But what you probably have seen as well, when I sort of removed the ALBs here, I actually got some more sort of signals to look at. And these are the SRE signals that basically came from Google and the SRE handbook. So we look typically at load, throughput, most of, you start to look at those things and kind of want to identify that. And over time, you're probably going to get into bottlenecks and latency and maybe even errors, like effectively what you can see here. Now, I did expand this into 24 hours, but I can still sort of focus into a specific area. I can also change the view here if I kind of prefer bars versus or whatever, squares versus circles. Now, when I select any of these things, what you see here is basically metrics that are deviating from what we say normal. And normal is built up over time. So you can see this metric here, right? So first of all, I can see that this is a DynamoDB, it's a bottleneck. It's effectively the read throttle events, a sum of that. And it's been drifting for 1000% in the last 20 minutes, or not last 20 minutes, but in these 20 minutes. And it happened at this point in time. Now, I can see the metric here. So this is a kind of 20 minutes, and it's basically drifting up here for 1000%. Now, I can also see sort of events, same metric, but with the time shift. So basically 24 hours ago or 1 week ago, it is kind of, you do have, so there's a lot of good info. You can kind of, again, you can see the infrastructure, you see where it is, and we can pivot into different things here. But in this case, I want to look further because here is that sort of DynamoDB write throttle. Now, when I look further into it, I can also see that I got a CPU load average. This is actually clustered. So this is some 4 different sort of instances. So Sumo is smart enough to understand that these are related to each other. Maybe the same applications running there, or maybe there's some other workload that's kind of gives us this kind of relationship. Now I can go straight into this specific one. So here we're looking at that specific instance, and CPU load average for 1 minute, and that's gonna be drifting for 1000% as well. And of course you can kind of see that here, right? It's roughly about 1000%. Now, it's of course more interesting to look at this one as well. So here we have the ELB app error. Now, the point, as I said, typically what happens is that you start to look at sort of load issues, throughput, bottlenecks, and then you kind of get into the error messages. So before, here's a EC2 error. This actually has to do with the 500 codes we were seeing, right? So I am sort of on the right track. Something is happening here. What normally happens is that things happens early, right? So when I go back in to look at the DynamoDB, sort of the real throttle events here, what I want to do now is to see what has happened with regards to DynamoDB. So of course, I can pivot into the entity dashboard, which basically is the view of DynamoDB. Now, what I want to do in here, I want to look at different sort of events that are taking place. So here I can see all the events that's taken place within the sort of DynamoDB. And of course, again, I would pivot straight into the raw data here, looking at it. Now, there's a number of update tables here, and I was quick enough to kind of jump into that. But, you know, you get some update tables, you get some delete tables and stuff like that. When I look at the raw data and I look at the event name, I can sort of make sure that I only look at the 5 events that are update tables. So I can exclude the ones here, not that it's that many, but you know, just kind of concentrating a bit more. Now I can look at this, and one thing that stands out is that someone has been in to kind of update or change the provision throughput. So, and in fact, I know that we do set the write and read capacity units to 5, but Ankit here, which I see there, is the name of the guy who's actually changed this. He went in to kind of change the read capacity units too, which is basically causing this kind of bottleneck, which is then sort of causing the other problems I'm having here. So a nice way of being able to kind of really drill down, get to the details of it, you know, having all collected in one single place, being able to pivot around, sort of like I'm starting to see a metric that I then go into the kind of entity, and I can then go into the logs and effectively see what's happened here, what has been going on here, right? Of course, you don't want to kind of sit and do this all the time. So what you would do is going into AWS Observability, where or sort of our monitors here, which basically is the alarms you can set. AWS Observability gives you this out of the box, as well as Kubernetes monitors or alerts. So it's all sort of comes with Sumo. And the only thing you need to do is to go in here. You need to enable this. So for example, in this case, I got a monitor looking for high numbers of 500 errors. Now I can double click on this and I can see the metrics we're doing here, and you can create metrics, you can create alerts based on metrics or logs. So there's different ways of doing this. But you can then sort of say like, okay, over what time frame, how much you want to monitor this, when are you going to fire an alert for it, what type of alert you're going to fire, and of course, how are you going to fire it. So, you know, yes, you can send an email, or you have different kind of webhooks. You can connect into your Jira, and of course, you have all your kind of Slack channels or team channels you want to use as well, right? So you can kind of set that up. So effectively, next time you don't have to kind of wait or look in the dashboards for this. You will effectively get alerted automatically when it comes to that point. Now, I know there's been a lot of things I've covered. You know, we do have this recorded, and, you know, I urge you, if there's anything here that you kind of found that you like, then reach out to my colleagues, or, you know, to myself and to us in Sumo, and you can kind of have a look at it. So with that, I'm kind of finishing the demo. Just summarizing kind of from a Sumo perspective around, you know, the platform differentiators, as in, I kind of touched on this briefly before as well, right? So we have the scalable platform that really kind of caters for any kind of machine data, or, you know, any kind of text-based data, and you know, secure platform as well, and a lot of sort of useful analytics in there, with a simple sort of usage-based licensing model. So hopefully that will kind of be satisfying for you. Now, I do have a couple of questions here. So basically, one of the questions is with regards to hybrid cloud. How does this work with hybrid environments on-prem and in the cloud? And actually, I realize I haven't got that here, but let me just quickly show you. Sorry, that is a different slide I have, but don't be worried, we have it here somewhere as well. What I quickly want to say is that basically, Sumo will collect data from pretty much anywhere. If you're in a on-prem environment, we can install our own collectors. They will start to communicate with Sumo, use a token the first time, and then establish a secure connection. And then you can send different data sources and metrics, depends on what you want to. If you're in sort of Kubernetes, we basically deploy sort of a daemon set, and then we start collect that automatically. And if you're in the cloud, you will effectively interface with Microsoft Azure or Azure Monitor, CloudWatch, or Stackdriver, and will push data into Sumo. Sumo also has a REST API functionality, which means that we can go out and we can collect data from Okta and other cloud services, because we see more and more customers really using kind of cloud services and wanting to kind of pull data into Sumo. So that's kind of a possible way of doing that too. And of course, when it comes to hybrid environment, I should say that 40% of all the data in Sumo is actually coming from on-prem environment. So there's quite a lot of kind of data still sort of in on-prem, in data centers, and anywhere you kind of think of, like. So whether you want to install a collector on each and every host, or whether you have a central collector for doing that and then pulling data of other systems, that's perfectly up to you. We also see a lot of interest, given sort of Kubernetes and given the capabilities that gives you in really deploying application on any kind of Kubernetes cluster. Deploying those applications on sort of different type of clusters, but still being the same sort of application, that really has sort of increased the number of customers coming to us and talking about that they actually use a multi-cloud provider or multi-cloud or hybrid environment. So we see that a lot more. I'm hoping that sort of satisfy you, but that's basically it. And another question I have here as well is effectively how do we charge for Sumo? And as I said, Sumo is kind of looking at the metrics for the cost of using Sumo is essentially down to the amount of data that you ingest to us. So the amount of log lines, gigabytes, terabytes, the number of metrics that are being pushed into us, and of course the kind of traces that you push in. So it's you have a lot of capabilities, and we have a credit-based model and all that. So speak to my counterparts within Sumo there, and you can get a full picture. But it's kind of usage-based and quite nicely fit into that. Another question I have here as well, and something that we haven't actually touched on, is of course kind of tracing. So we're talking about a lot about sort of microservices, and of course if you get a microservices type application, you want to be able to kind of understand the traces and stuff like that. So you can effectively see that, you can pivot into the traces itself, and you can then really drill into this in a lot more granular detail, right? So that is kind of part of Sumo, and just kind of using it whenever you need to. The beauty with this is that when you are in kind of looking at traces and stuff like that as well, you can effectively pivot into the logs that are specific to the kind of trace, to the span, to whatever it is. So you can be very kind of detailed and granular in how you want to kind of look at the data and so on. Those were the questions I had, I think. Yes. So yeah, with that in mind, I just want to kind of finish and basically say that, speak to any of my counterparts. We're here to help you guys. Go to sumologic.com. You can just take out a free trial. You can try it for free for 30 days. Any of me or any of my colleagues will help you to get going. So thanks a lot for today, and have a good day.